Chapter 1. The Bloodmark Ball invitation had arrived 3 days after Isabel's life fell apart. Heavy parchment, sealed with black wax and a symbol she didn't recognize, a crescent moon pierced by a thorn. No return address. No explanation. Just an instruction. Attend the Bloodmark Ball. Midnight. The Thorn Estate. Come alone. She should have burned it. Instead, she stood at the iron gates of a crumbling manor house on the city's edge, rain soaking through her coat, wondering if desperation had finally made her reckless. The estate loomed against the storm clouds, all Gothic spires and broken statuary, windows glowing with candlelight that seemed to flicker in rhythm with her pulse. Isabel had nowhere else to go. Her fiancé had left her for her sister 2 weeks ago, taking her savings and her reputation with him. Her landlord had locked her out yesterday. The invitation had promised shelter, work, discretion. She'd stopped asking questions when survival became the only answer that mattered. The gates opened. Before she could knock, a pale servant in archaic dress, all velvet and brass buttons, gestured her inside without a word. His movements were too smooth, his smile too knowing. Isabel clutched her bag tighter and followed him up the gravel drive, past gardens overrun with night-blooming roses that looked black in the moonlight. The manor's entrance hall stole her breath. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Crystal chandeliers hung from iron chains, their candles casting golden light across marble floors inlaid with silver. Tapestries lined the walls, medieval hunting scenes where the prey looked disturbingly human. A grand staircase swept upward, its banisters carved with thorn vines that seemed to writhe in the flickering light, and everywhere were people who didn't quite look like people, too beautiful, too still. Eyes that caught the light like animals' eyes, reflecting gold and crimson. They moved through the hall in pairs and small groups, their conversations pitched too low for Isabel to hear, their laughter like wind chimes made of bone. Miss Thorne, a woman appeared at her elbow, porcelain skin, black dress, smile sharp enough to cut. How delightful you accepted the invitation. Lord Marcellus will be pleased. I don't. Isabel started, but the woman was already guiding her toward a ballroom that opened like a cathedral. The space was enormous. Dozens of couples waltzed across the floor to music that had no visible source, a haunting melody of strings and piano that seemed to rise from the walls themselves. More of those two beautiful people filled the room, their movements precise and predatory, their jewelry glinting like drops of blood in candlelight. Isabel felt every eye turned toward her. The mortal, someone whispered, fresh. Another murmured, Lord Marcellus claims this one. The crowd parted, and Isabel saw him. He stood at the far end of the ballroom, beneath a stained glass window that cast crimson light across his shoulders. Tall, lean, dressed in black that seemed to drink the shadows around him. Dark hair fell to his collar, framing a face that was beautiful the way storms were beautiful, dangerous, inevitable, impossible to look away from. His eyes found hers across the room, and Isabel felt the impact like a physical blow. Silver gray, ancient, hungry. He moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, the crowd melting away from his path. When he stopped before her, Isabel had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. Up close, she could see the slight points of his canines, the way his chest didn't rise and fall with breath, the absolute stillness of his body between movements. Miss Thorne, his voice was velvet over iron, accented with something old and foreign. I'm told you're seeking sanctuary. Isabel's throat had gone dry. I need work. The invitation said. The invitation, he interrupted softly, was a formality. You were marked 3 nights ago when you crossed through Rothwell Square at midnight. My territory, my protection. His eyes narrowed. Or my claim, depending on how you choose to see it. She took a step back. I don't understand. No, he tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You wouldn't. Your world doesn't teach you about ours anymore. Safer that way for everyone. He extended one gloved hand. Dance with me, Isabel, or every man in this room will assume you're unclaimed. And I promise you won't like what happens next. Isabel looked around the ballroom. The beautiful monsters had stopped pretending to dance. They watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to predatory interest, their unnatural eyes gleaming in the candlelight. Some smiled, revealing elongated canines. Others simply stared with the patient stillness of creatures who could wait forever. What are you? She whispered. Lord Marcellus smiled, and it was terrible and beautiful at once. Very old, very dangerous. And the only reason you're still breathing. He stepped closer, his hand still extended between them. The music is ending, Miss Thorne. Choose quickly. The violin's cry rose to a crescendo. Isabel placed her shaking hand in his fingers closed around hers, cool, strong, careful. He pulled her onto the dance floor as the music shifted into something slower, darker, a waltz that felt like a heartbeat slowing toward sleep. His other hand settled at her waist, and even through her coat, his touch burned cold. What did you mean, marked? Isabel managed as he guided her into the first turn. He moved like water, like wind, and she had to concentrate not to stumble. House Morgrave lost 3 members in the Rothwell massacre. His voice was pitched for her ears alone. They've been hunting through my territory for survivors. When you cross the square, you walk through a blood ward, our early warning system. It marked you as mortal, vulnerable, and trespassing in contested ground. His gray eyes held hers. House Morgrave would have taken you, used you as bait or leverage or food. Isabel's stomach turned. Food? We are what we are, Miss Thorne. No apology in his tone, just flat truth. But House Dreven doesn't feed without consent. That's why I sent the invitation. Why I claimed you publicly tonight. His hand tightened fractionally at her waist. And why you're going to stay in this manner until the war between our houses is resolved. War. The word came out too loud. Several nearby dancers glanced their way before quickly looking elsewhere. Lord Marcellus pulled her closer until her chest nearly brushed his. Quiet, he murmured against her temple, and Isabel shivered. Yes, war. The old kind, fought in shadows and blood oaths and midnight raids. You walked into the middle of it. He drew back enough to meet her eyes again. I'm offering you protection. A room, safety, employment, if you wish it. In exchange, you don't leave these grounds until it's safe. You don't invite anyone across the threshold. And you don't ask questions I'm not ready to answer. And if I refuse, then you walk out those doors alone. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something almost like regret. And House Morgrave will find you before dawn. They're very good at finding marked mortals. The music swelled around them. Beautiful and eerie, Isabel thought of her empty bank account, her locked apartment, her sister's wedding invitation sitting in her coat pocket like a knife. She thought of the rain outside and the creatures inside, all watching her with inhuman patience. She thought of Lord Marcellus's hand at her waist, cold and careful, holding her like she was something precious that might break. One condition, she heard herself say. His eyebrows rose. Bold. You tell me what you are. The truth. Tonight, Lord Marcellus studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled, and for the first time, she saw weariness behind the ancient danger in his eyes. Vampire, he said simply. Lord of House Dreven, 347 years old, and currently the only thing standing between you and a death you can't imagine. The music ended, the ballroom fell silent, and Isabel Thorne, homeless and heartbroken and desperate, nodded once. Then I accept your protection. Chapter 2. The West-winged ballroom emptied within minutes of Isabel's acceptance. The other vampires, she forced herself to think the word. To accept it drifted away like smoke, their whispered conversations fading into the manor's shadowed corridors. The musicians vanished. Even the servants disappeared, leaving only Lord Marcellus standing beside her in the vast, candlelit space. Come. He didn't offer his hand this time. Simply turned toward a doorway half hidden behind a velvet curtain. Your room is in the west wing, safest part of the manor. Isabel followed, her footsteps echoing against his silence. They moved through a maze of corridors, each more opulent and decaying than the last. Gilt-framed paintings watched them pass, portraits of pale figures in centuries-old dress, their eyes seeming to track movement. Isabel tried not to look too closely at the subject's elongated canines. Their 2 bright eyes, the paintings, she said, just to break the silence. Are they all dead or undead? Yes. Lord Marcellus didn't slow his pace. House Dreven has held this territory for 400 years. Those are my predecessors, my rivals, my family. He paused before a portrait of a woman in Elizabethan dress, her beauty terrible and cold. My maker. Isabel stopped. She made you vampire? In 1677, London. During the plague year, his voice remained neutral. But something flickered across his expression too fast for Isabel to read. I was dying. She offered eternity. I accepted before understanding the price. He turned away from the portrait. We all do. They climbed a narrow staircase. the air growing colder with each step. Isabel pulled her damp coat tighter, shivering. Lord Marcellus noticed, of course he noticed, and shrugged out of his jacket without a word, draping it across her shoulders. The fabric held no warmth, but it smelled of old books and night air and something darkly spiced she couldn't name. "Thank you," she murmured. He said nothing. The west wing was quieter than the rest of the manor. The corridors, narrower and less ornate. Lord Marcellus stopped before a heavy oak door carved with protective symbols, circles and crescents and script Isabel didn't recognize. He produced an iron key from his pocket and unlocked it. "This was my sister's room." He pushed the door open, revealing a space that took Isabel's breath away. It was beautiful. Not the cold Gothic beauty of the ballroom, but something warmer, feminine without being delicate. A four-poster bed draped in deep burgundy velvet dominated one wall. A writing desk set beneath a leaded glass window overlooking the rain-swept gardens. Bookshelves lined another wall, crammed with leather-bound volumes. A fireplace held fresh logs, unlit but ready. "Your sister," Isabel said carefully, stepping inside. "Is she gone?" Lord Marcellus remained in the doorway, as if some invisible barrier prevented him from entering. 50 years now. She chose mortality over immortality when the chance came. His gray eyes found Isabel's. "I haven't been able to change anything in this room since." There was grief in his voice, old and deep and carefully controlled. Isabel set her bag down on the bed, suddenly aware of how little she'd brought with her. One change of clothes, her mother's journal, the engagement ring she hadn't been able to pawn yet. Everything she owned fit in a canvas bag. "The bathroom is through there." Lord Marcellus gestured to a door she hadn't noticed. "Hot water still works. Towels in the cabinet. There's a lock on the bedroom door. Use it." He paused. "Use it against everyone, Miss Thorne. Even me. You said I was protected here. You are. From House Moorgrave, from the other families, from anyone who would claim you without consent." His expression hardened. "But you're mortal in a house full of predators. Some instincts are older than honor." Isabel's pulse quickened. "Are you saying you're dangerous to me?" Lord Marcellus smiled, and it was nothing like the terrible beauty from the ballroom. This smile was tired, almost human. "I'm saying I haven't fed in 3 days because I've been preparing for tonight's ball. I'm saying your heartbeat sounds like a war drum to my senses right now. I'm saying yes, Miss Thorne, I'm very dangerous to you." He stepped back from the doorway. "Lock the door. Don't invite anyone in. I'll send a servant with food within the hour." "Wait." Isabel moved toward him before she could think better of it. "You said you don't feed without consent. What does that mean exactly?" He went very still, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She forced herself to hold his gaze. "It means," he said slowly, "that House Dreven has rules. No hunting unwilling prey. No turning mortals who don't understand the consequences. No feeding to the point of death or addiction." His voice dropped lower. "And no taking blood from anyone who can't freely refuse, which includes anyone living under our protection. Anyone bound by debt or fear. Anyone who doesn't fully comprehend what they're offering. So you starve? We manage." Something flickered in his eyes, hunger, maybe, or frustration. "There are willing donors in the city. Mortals who understand what we are and choose to feed us anyway. We compensate them well, ensure their safety, respect their boundaries." He tilted his head slightly. "It's slower than hunting, requires more control. But it's the only way House Dreven has survived this long without drawing mortal attention." Isabel processed this, her mind racing. "And House Moorgrave hunts." The word was flat, final. "Takes what it wants. Leaves bodies or makes new vampires without care for the consequences. It's why we're at war. They broke the Treaty of 1843, killed mortals in my territory. And now the council demands restitution." He glanced toward the window, where rain lashed against the glass. "The houses are choosing sides. War is coming, whether we want it or not." Thunder rumbled in the distance. Lord Marcellus turned back to her. And for a moment, he looked less like an ancient predator and more like a man carrying weight he couldn't set down. "Get some rest, Miss Thorne. Tomorrow I'll explain the rules of this house, what you can and cannot do, where you're safe and where you're not." He paused in the doorway. "And Isabel?" She looked up at the sound of her first name. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for accepting my protection. I know you had no good choices tonight. I'll try to make sure you don't regret this one." Then he was gone. The door closing softly behind him, Isabel stood alone in a dead woman's room, wearing a vampire's coat. listening to the lock click into place with fingers that shook only. Chapter 3. Night habit. Sizable didn't sleep. She'd tried curled beneath the heavy velvet covers, listening to the rain hammer against the windows, but every creak of the old manor sent her pulse racing. Every shadow seemed to move, and that howl she'd heard earlier kept echoing in her mind. Wild and wrong and too close. T dawn. She finally gave up. The room looked different in the gray morning light filtering through the leaded glass. Less gothic romance, more faded grandeur. She could see the places where wallpaper had peeled, where dust gathered in corners, where time had worn the beauty thin. It made the space feel more real somehow, more honest. Isabel washed her face in the bathroom. Marble and brass fixtures that had been elegant a century ago and changed into her only clean clothes. Then she unlocked the door and stepped into the corridor, uncertain what she'd find. Silence, complete and absolute. The manor felt abandoned in daylight. No servants, no movement, no sound, except the rain still falling steadily outside. Isabel made her way back through the maze of corridors, trying to retrace last night's path. She got lost twice before finding the grand staircase. The entrance hall was empty, the chandeliers unlit. Without candlelight, the space looked less magical and more melancholy, all that beauty with no one to witness it. Hello? Her voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Nothing. Isabel descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the carved banister. At the bottom, she noticed a corridor she hadn't seen last night, partially hidden behind one of the massive tapestries. Warm light spilled from somewhere down its length, and she caught the scent of bread baking. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The corridor led to a kitchen that could have served a hotel, all industrial stoves and copper pots and a wooden table large enough to seat 20. A woman stood at the counter kneading dough, her back to Isabel. She was humming something low and tuneless. Excuse me, Isabel said quietly. The woman turned, and Isabel's breath caught. She was old, truly old. Her face mapped with wrinkles, her hair white as bone, but her eyes were sharp and clear, and very much alive. Human, the first human Isabel had seen since entering the manor. You'll be the marked one, the woman said, dusting flour from her hands. Her accent was thick, Eastern European, maybe. Lord Marcellus said you'd be hungry. Sit. Isabel sat at the table while the woman moved efficiently around the kitchen, assembling breakfast bread, soft cheese, sliced apples, tea that smelled of bergamot. She set the plate before Isabel without ceremony. Eat, you're too thin, thank you. Isabel took a bite of bread still warm, perfectly textured, and nearly moaned. This is incredible. The woman's expression softened slightly. I'm Mrs. Kovac. I run this house during daylight. Cook, clean, keep the place from falling apart. She poured herself tea and sat across from Isabel. You'll see me and two others, groundskeeper and day servant. We're human. We're paid well. We don't ask questions. You know what they are, Isabel said. Not a question. For 40 years now, Mrs. Kovac sipped her tea. I was younger than you when House Dreven took me in. Fleeing bad marriage, bad debts, bad choices. Lord Marcellus gave me work, protection, respect. She met Isabel's eyes. Never once touched me without asking. Never once threatened. That's rare in their world. Rare in ours too. Isabel absorbed this. Where are they? The vampires? Sleeping. They're dead to the world during daylight, can't wake until sunset. It's when we do all the real work, Mrs. Kovac gestured toward the windows. You're safe to explore during the day. Just stay out of the east wing, that's where the house sleeps, and there are protections on those doors that'll hurt you if you try to enter. What kind of protections? Blood wards. Same kind that marked you in the square, Mrs. Kovac refilled Isabel's tea. They recognize humans. Keep us out where we shouldn't be. Lord Marcellus says it's for our safety as much as there's some vampires wake angry if disturbed during day sleep. Isabel thought about Lord Marcellus. That careful stillness he maintained, the hunger he'd admitted to. He hasn't fed in days. He told me last night. Mrs. Kovac's expression tightened. War makes everything harder. His regular donors won't come to the manor anymore, too dangerous with House Morgrave watching the grounds. And he won't hunt, won't break his own rules even to survive. She shook her head. Stubborn man. Honorable, but stubborn. What happens if he doesn't feed? Vampires don't die from starvation, girl. They get desperate, lose control, become the monsters they work so hard not to be. Mrs. Kovac stood, gathering the empty dishes. He'll manage. He always does. But it won't be comfortable for him. Isabel finished her tea, mind churning. Mrs. Kovac? That howl last night, what was it? The old woman went very still. You heard that? Right after Lord Marcellus left my room. Morgrave scouts. They circle the grounds at night, testing the wards, looking for weaknesses. Mrs. Kovac's voice dropped. War's coming faster than anyone expected. There was another murder 2 days ago, mortal woman, drained and left in Rothwell Square. The council's demanding justice, and House Morgrave's claiming House Dreven violated territory accords first. Did they? Mrs. Kovac looked at her for a long moment. That's not a question I can answer, child. But I can tell you this: Lord Marcellus has ruled this house for 100 years without once breaking the old laws. He's not the monster House Morgrave wants everyone to believe. She moved toward the door, then paused. Your room, it was Elena's, his sister. Did he tell you? A little. She was human when she died. Chose it. Chose aging and death over immortality. Mrs. Kovac's expression was unreadable. Broke his heart, that choice. But he let her make it anyway. Let her go. She met Isabel's eyes. Remember that. When he seems cold or distant, he knows what it costs to care for mortals. He does it anyway. Then she was gone. Leaving Isabel alone with her thoughts and the sound of rain against stone, Isabel spent the day exploring the manor's daylight spaces, the library with its thousands of volumes in dozens of languages, the conservatory, where roses grew wild despite the season, the portrait gallery, where centuries of the dead watched her pass. Everywhere she went, she felt the weight of history, of lives lived and lost and transformed beyond recognition. At sunset, the manor woke. Isabel was in the library when she felt the change, a subtle shift in the air, like a collective breath drawn. Footsteps sounded in distant corridors. Voices murmured in languages she didn't know. The chandeliers blazed to life with candles she hadn't seen anyone light, and Lord Marcellus appeared in the library doorway, silent as death, watching her with those ancient gray eyes. Miss Thorne. He looked exactly as he had last night, same dark clothes, same careful stillness. But she could see the hunger more clearly now, the tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze lingered on her throat before he forced it away. I trust you slept well? Isabel closed the book she'd been reading, a history of vampire houses, written in Latin she was slowly translating. Not really. No, I wouldn't have either. He moved into the library, keeping careful distance between them. I came to discuss the rules of this house. What you need to know to stay safe. Mrs. Kovac already explained some things, did she? Something flickered in his expression, approval, maybe, or relief. Then you understand the daylight hours are yours, the east wing is forbidden, and you don't leave the grounds under any circumstances. Yes, Isabel stood, facing him across the library. But she also said you haven't fed properly in days, that you're refusing help because of your rules. Lord Marcellus went very still. That's not your concern, isn't it? If you lose control, I won't. The words were sharp, final. I've maintained control for 3 centuries, Miss Thorne. I'm not about to break now. But his hands were clenched at his sides, and his eyes had gone darker gray, bleeding toward black. Outside, something howled, closer this time. Chapter 4. Broken Ward's howl shattered the library's quiet like glass. Lord Marcellus's head snapped toward the window, every line of his body going predator tense. In the span of a heartbeat, he crossed the space between them and gripped Isabel's arm, not hard, but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away. How many? A woman's voice came from the doorway. Isabel turned to see a vampire she hadn't met before, tall, dark-skinned, dressed in modern clothes that looked jarring against the manor's Gothic aesthetic. Her eyes glowed amber in the candlelight, at least 6, judging by the pattern. Lord Marcellus pulled Isabel toward the door, his movements controlled but urgent. They're testing the north ward. Probably noticed the flicker this morning when the groundskeeper repaired the garden gate. That's a weak point. Now it is. The woman warrior, Isabel thought. Something about her stance screamed combat training. Fell into step beside them. Morgrave's getting bolder. This is the 3rd probe in 2 days. They moved through corridors at a pace that had Isabel nearly running to keep up. Other vampires emerged from rooms and shadows, all heading in the same direction. None of them spared Isabel more than a glance. What's happening? She gasped. The wards are breaking. Lord Marcellus didn't slow down. House Morgrave has a blood witch on their side. She's been weakening our protections systematically. Once they fall completely, they'll be able to enter the grounds freely. And then? He looked at her, and the hunger in his eyes had been replaced by something colder. Then they take what they came for. The territory, the house seat, and anyone under my protection that they can use as leverage. They reached a large drawing room that had been converted into something like a war room. Maps covered every surface, old ones showing the city's original layout, modern ones marked with territories and boundaries. Symbols Isabel didn't recognize had been drawn in what looked like dried blood. A man stood at the center table, ancient and sharp-featured, his fingers tracing ward lines on the largest map. He looked up as they entered. "The north wall is compromised," he said, without preamble. "We have maybe an hour before they can breach it completely. Can you reinforce it?" Lord Marcellus released Isabel's arm, moving to study the map, not without more blood. The man's gaze flicked to Isabel, then away. Fresh blood, human blood, freely given. The room went silent. Isabel felt every vampire's attention shift toward her, subtle, predatory, assessing. Her heart kicked against her ribs, but she forced herself to stand still, to not show fear. No, Lord Marcellus's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Find another way, Victor." "There isn't another way." Victor straightened, his expression grim. "Blood words require blood to maintain. Vampire blood works for minor repairs, but a breach this size needs human essence. Willing sacrifice properly channeled." He looked at Lord Marcellus steadily. "You know the law. The law also says we don't coerce mortals under our protection. I'm not suggesting coercion. I'm suggesting you ask." All eyes turned to Isabel. She swallowed hard, mind racing. "What would it involve?" "Exactly, Miss Thorne," Lord Marcellus started, but she held up a hand. "I want to know." Victor moved around the table, his movements careful, non-threatening. "We would need perhaps a cup of blood, drawn slowly to avoid shock. I would use it to reinforce the ward anchors, the physical points where the protections are rooted. The process takes about an hour. You would be weak afterward, possibly dizzy, but not in danger. And if I refuse? Then the wards fall within the hour," the amber-eyed woman said bluntly. "Moorgrave breaches the grounds. We fight. People die, probably including you, since you're exactly the kind of leverage they're looking for." Lord Marcellus moved between Isabel and the others, his body a wall. "There are other options. We can evacuate, regroup at the city house, which is already under siege," Victor interrupted. "They've been watching it for days. We move her there. We lead them straight to our last stronghold. Then we find a safe house." Marcellus. Victor's voice softened. "There are no more safe places. Not until this war is decided. You know that." The silent stretch taut. Isabel studied Lord Marcellus's back, the rigid line of his shoulders, the tension in his hands. He was protecting her, she realized. Even now, even when it might cost him everything, he was trying to give her a choice that wasn't forced by circumstance. Something Mrs. Kovac had said echoed in her mind. He knows what it costs to care for mortals. He does it anyway. "I'll do it," Isabel said quietly. Lord Marcellus spun to face her. "No, I'm not." She met his gaze, refusing to look away. "You said House Dreven doesn't take without consent. I'm consenting, freely, because the alternative is worse for everyone. You don't understand what you're offering." "I understand perfectly." She stepped around him, addressing Victor directly. "1 cup of blood, drawn slowly, used only for the wards, and afterward, I rest. Those are my terms." Victor inclined his head. "Acceptable, Isabel." Lord Marcellus's voice held a warning she couldn't quite parse. "Once you offer blood willingly, every vampire in this house will know. The scent changes. It marks you as someone who chooses to feed us. So it makes you infinitely more valuable to our enemies, more vulnerable to manipulation, more." He stopped, jaw clenched. "It complicates everything." Another howl rose outside, joined by 2 more. The amber-eyed woman swore. "They're circling. We're out of time." Isabel looked at Lord Marcellus, at the war in his expression, hunger and honor and something that might have been fear. "You offered me protection," she said softly. "Let me protect you back. Just this once." For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. "Victor will perform the ritual. I'll supervise." His eyes held hers. "If at any point you want to stop, you say so. Immediately. No matter what's happening with the wards. Understood?" Victor began gathering supplies, silver bowls, ritual knives, vials of herbs and oils. The other vampires dispersed to their defensive positions, moving with military precision. Within minutes, the drawing room had been cleared, except for Isabel, Lord Marcellus, and Victor. Sit here. Victor indicated a chair he'd placed in the center of a chalk circle drawn on the floor. Strange symbols surrounded it, pulsing faintly with light Isabel couldn't quite see directly. She sat. Her hands were shaking. Lord Marcellus knelt beside the chair, his face level with hers. Look at me, he said quietly. Not at the knife, not at Victor. Just at me. Isabel focused on his eyes, gray going silver in the candlelight, ancient and steady and surprisingly kind. Victor took her left hand, extending her arm over the silver bowl. The ritual knife gleamed. Freely given? He asked formally. Isabel's voice didn't shake. Freely given. The blade cut quick and clean, blood welled, bright red against her pale skin, and dripped steadily into the bowl. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room, a rhythmic pattering that matched her pulse. Lord Marcellus's pupils dilated, his nostrils flaring. But he didn't move, didn't look away from her face. Tell me something, Isabel said, fighting the dizziness beginning to creep up her spine. Something true. Distract me. His hand found hers, the one not bleeding, and held it carefully. I haven't wanted to kill someone in 50 years, he said quietly. Until tonight. I would slaughter every member of House Morgrave if it meant you never had to do this. The blood continued to fall, and outside, the wards began to glow. Chapter 5. Ancient Oaths. Ward activation felt like lightning without thunder, a silent crack of power that made Isabel's teeth ache. Victor worked quickly, carrying the bowl of her blood to each corner of the room where ward stones had been embedded in the walls. He chanted in a language that predated Latin, his voice resonating with harmonics that seemed impossible from a single throat. Each time he anointed a stone, light flared crimson first, then gold, then settling into a steady silver pulse. Isabel watched through vision that kept blurring at the edges. Lord Marcellus had bound her arm with clean linen after Victor had collected enough blood, but she could still feel the absence, a hollowness in her veins that made the room tilt. Almost done, Lord Marcellus murmured, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. You're doing beautifully. Feels strange, she managed. Cold. He shrugged out of his jacket, the same one he'd given her last night, and draped it around her shoulders again. Then, with movements so careful they seemed choreographed, he lifted her from the chair and settled into it himself, arranging her in his lap like she weighed nothing. Isabel should have protested, should have felt uncomfortable, vulnerable, exposed. Instead, she found herself leaning into his chest, chasing the coolness of his body that somehow felt stabilizing against her feverish skin. The wards are holding. Victor finished the last corner and turned to face them, satisfaction clear in his expression. Strong. They'll last weeks now, maybe months if we're careful. Well done, Miss Thorne. Will she be all right? Lord Marcellus's voice rumbled against Isabel's back. She needs rest, fluids, iron-rich foods. Mrs. Kovac will know what to prepare. Victor cleaned his ritual tools with practiced efficiency. The dizziness should pass within a few hours. She was brave. Most humans panic when they see how much blood is actually required. Most humans haven't been backed into corners the way she has, Lord Marcellus said quietly. Victor paused, studying them both with an expression Isabel couldn't read. No, suppose they haven't. He gathered his supplies. I'll report to the others that the wards are secured. You should get her to bed before. A scream cut through the night. Human, female, coming from somewhere in the manor's depths. Lord Marcellus was on his feet instantly, Isabel secure in his arms. He moved toward the door, but Victor blocked his path. You can't. Not carrying her. Not with her blood still fresh on your senses. Victor's expression was grim. Let me investigate. You get the mortal to safety. Another scream. This one ending in a wet gurgle. Lord Marcellus's entire body vibrated with tension. The careful control he'd maintained shattered for just a moment. And Isabel saw what he really was, predator barely contained in civilized skin. Hunger and rage and violence held back by sheer force of will. Then he breathed out slowly, and the monster receded. Go. Take Serafini with you. If it's a breach, I'll signal. Victor was already moving. Supernatural speed carrying him into the corridor before Isabel could blink. Lord Marcellus carried her in the opposite direction, taking a servant's staircase that wound upward into darkness. Isabel clung to his shirt, her head spinning. What's happening? I don't know yet. His voice was tight. Could be Morgrave. Could be internal. We have vampires in this house who aren't fully loyal, who might be bribed or threatened into betraying us. Your own people? Not everyone in House Dreven agrees with my rules. Some think mercy toward mortals makes us weak. That consent-based feeding is a liability. He kicked open a door she didn't recognize, not her room, somewhere smaller and more austere. They're wrong, but fear makes people stupid. He set her on a narrow bed and moved immediately to lock the door, check the window, scan the room for threats. Military precision, Isabel thought distantly. He'd been a soldier once, before he was a vampire. She could see it in the way he cleared the space, positioned himself between her and the only exit. Whose room is this? Mine. He didn't look at her, his attention fixed on the locked door. It's warded separately from the rest of the house. No one can enter without my explicit permission, not even Victor. You're safer here than anywhere else. Isabel looked around with new eyes. The room was Spartan: bed, desk, wardrobe, nothing decorative except a single painting of a young woman who looked like Lord Marcellus around the eyes. His sister, she realized. Elena. You keep her portrait here. Where you sleep? I don't sleep much anymore. He finally turned to face her, and his expression was raw in a way she hadn't seen before. But yes, I keep her close. She's the reason I maintain these rules, these boundaries. She made me promise, before she died, that I'd never become the monster I was capable of being. Another scream echoed through the manor, distant and terrible. Lord Marcellus flinched. I should be down there, fighting, protecting my house. Victor said. I know what he said. Frustration bled into his voice. He's right. Your blood is too fresh, too present. If I go down there now, I'll be more liability than asset. The hunger is. He stopped, jaw clenched. It's been a long time since I've struggled this much. Isabel watched him pace the small room like a caged animal. 3 centuries old, powerful enough to rule an entire vampire house. And he was trapped by his own honor, by promises made to a dead woman who'd chosen mortality over him. When did you last feed? She asked. Actually feed. Not just enough to survive? He laughed, sharp and bitter. You don't want to know. I do. He stopped pacing, studying her with those ancient eyes. 8 days. My regular donor, a college student who needs money for tuition, stopped coming when the war escalated. Too dangerous. I don't blame her. 8 days. Isabel sat up slowly, fighting the dizziness. And you just drained a cup of my blood for the wards, so now you're surrounded by the scent. Yes, the word came out strained. Which is why you need to rest, and I need to maintain distance. And we both need to stop having this conversation. What if I offered? The room went absolutely silent. Lord Marcellus stared at her like she'd suggested setting herself on fire. No, I'm not. You said consent matters. I'm consenting. You're lightheaded from blood loss. You don't know what you're saying. But his eyes had gone dark again. Hunger bleeding through the careful control. I know exactly what I'm saying. Isabel stood on, shaking legs, using the bed frame for support. You protected me, fed me, gave me shelter when I had nothing. You held my hand while I bled for your wards, and didn't take a single drop for yourself, even though you're starving. She took a step toward him. Let me help you. Isabel, is it consent you need? I consent. Is it permission? I give it freely. Another step. Or is it that you're afraid of what it means? He backed away from her like she was the dangerous one. It creates a bond. Blood shared willingly, especially between vampire and human. It ties you to me in ways that are difficult to break. You'd feel my hunger, my moods. I'd be able to find you anywhere. And if House Morgrave discovered it, they'd what? Try harder to kill me? Isabel laughed weakly. I'm already in danger. At least this way, one of us gets stronger. Below them, something crashed. Glass shattering, wood splintering. Lord Marcellus's control was fraying visibly. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders. The way his hands had curled into fists, the black now completely consuming the gray of his eyes. One condition, he said hoarsely. You tell me to stop. I stop. Immediately. No matter how close I am to satisfied. Isabel held out her wrist, the one not already bandaged. Deal. Chapter 6. Blood and trust. Lord Marcellus didn't move for a long moment, just stared at her outstretched wrist like it might burn him. You should sit, he finally said, his voice rough. This will be easier if you're not standing. Isabel sank back onto the bed, suddenly aware of how fast her heart was beating. Lord Marcellus knelt before her, a strange reversal of power that made her breath catch. At this angle, She was slightly above him, looking down at dark hair and the vulnerable curve of his neck. I need you to understand something first. He took her offered wrist in both hands, his touch feather-light. Feeding isn't like the stories. It's not violent or painful if done correctly, but it is intimate. More intimate than most mortals realize until it's happening. I trust you. His eyes snapped to hers. You shouldn't. You barely know me. I know you've had 8 days to lose control and hurt me. You haven't. Isabel kept her voice steady, despite the fear curling in her stomach. I know you gave your sister a choice, even though it broke your heart. I know. You held my hand while I bled and didn't take anything for yourself. She paused. That's enough. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or the beginning of hope. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. He almost smiled. Then his attention dropped to her wrist, and all trace of humanity fled from his face. What remained was pure predator-focused, hungry, ancient beyond measure. Last chance to refuse, he whispered. I'm not refusing. Lord Marcellus brought her wrist to his mouth and pressed his lips to her pulse point, not biting yet, just feeling the rhythm of her blood. His breath ghosted across her skin, cool and steady. Then, so gently she barely felt it, his fangs pierced flesh. The sensation was nothing like Isabel expected. Not pain exactly, though there was a sharp sting at first. But then warmth, spreading from the bite point up her arm, into her chest, settling low in her belly like whiskey on an empty stomach. Her vision blurred at the edges, the room tilting in a way that had nothing to do with blood loss. Lord Marcellus made a sound low in his throat, relief or pleasure or both, and pulled her wrist closer. She felt each draw of blood as a gentle tug, rhythmic and hypnotic. The connection between them intensified with every swallow, until Isabel could almost feel his hunger receding, his strength returning, his presence solidifying in ways she didn't have words for. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first safe thing she'd experienced in months. Marcellus, she breathed, not even sure why she used his name. He froze, then pulled back slightly, his eyes finding hers. They'd gone completely silver now, glowing faintly in the dim room. Blood stained his lips, her blood, and the sight should have disgusted her but didn't. All right? His voice had dropped an octave, rough with barely restrained need. Yes. Don't stop. He returned to her wrist, more careful now, each draw measured and controlled. Isabel let her head fall back, focusing on breathing, on the strange warmth pooling in her veins, on the feeling of being needed in a way that had nothing to do with usefulness or obligation. Time became fluid. Could have been seconds or minutes or hours that he fed, his cool hand steadying her arm, his presence filling the small room until there was nothing else. Finally, he pulled away, releasing her wrist. His tongue swept across the puncture wounds once, twice, and the bleeding stopped. When she looked, there were only 2 small marks, already beginning to heal. Enough, he said quietly, though his eyes still glowed with hunger not fully sated. Any more would weaken you too much. Isabel felt hollow again, but differently than before. This emptiness came with a strange awareness of Lord Marcellus, his position in the room, his emotional state, the edge of his hunger that still lingered despite feeding. Like a thread had been tied between them that she could follow even blind. I feel you, she said wonderingly. Inside my head. Not thoughts but presence. The blood bond. He rose smoothly, putting distance between them again. Color had returned to his face, making him look more alive than he had since she'd arrived. It'll fade after a few days if we don't reinforce it. But for now, yes, you'll sense me, and I'll sense you. A crash from below made them both flinch. The fighting was still happening, maybe getting closer. Lord Marcellus moved to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain. Isabel joined him, peering into the rain-soaked grounds. Figures moved in the darkness too fast to be human, their movements predatory and violent. She caught glimpses of fangs, of eyes glowing various colors, of blood, black in the moonlight. House Morgrave got inside. After all, Lord Marcellus said grimly. The wards are holding the main force out, but they must have had vampires already hidden on the grounds before we reinforced them. How many? Hard to say. At least a dozen. He watched the chaos below with the calculation of a general surveying a battlefield. They're attacking the east wing, trying to reach the sleeping quarters. Kill us during day, sleep tomorrow when we're vulnerable. What do we do? He looked at her, and some of the cold calculation softened. You stay here. This room is warded beyond anything. They can break through quickly. I go down there and help my people. you just fed. You're stronger now, yes. His hand came up, almost touching her face before he caught himself and lowered it. Because of you. Thank you, Isabel. That was a gift I didn't deserve. You saved my life. I'd say we're even. We're nowhere close to even. He moved toward the door, then paused. Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me or Victor. If you hear me outside and I don't call you by name, if I just knock or demand entry, don't open it. Morgrave vampires can mimic voices. How will I know it's really you? He thought for a moment. Ask me about Elena, about what she chose. Only I know the full truth of that story. Isabel nodded, committing it to memory. Be careful. Something flickered in his expression, surprise again, as if care from a mortal was unexpected. I've survived 3 centuries of vampire politics. I'll survive this too. But his eyes lingered on her face like he was memorizing it. Stay safe, Isabel, please. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Isabel locked it as instructed, then sank back onto the bed, exhaustion crashing over her in waves. Through the blood bond, she could feel Lord Marcellus moving through the manor, descending stairs, entering combat. His presence burning bright with purpose and controlled fury. She closed her eyes, focusing on that thread of connection. Whatever was happening below, she'd know if he was in real danger, and somehow, despite everything, that knowledge let her finally rest. Chapter 7. The Seageisable awoke to silence, not peaceful silence, the kind that came after violence, when the air still held echoes of screaming. She sat up slowly, head pounding, and checked the window. Dawn was breaking, gray light filtering through rain clouds that hadn't stopped their assault on the manor. Through the blood bond, she could feel Lord Marcellus distant now, his presence dimmed to almost nothing. Sleeping, she realized. Day sleep. The death-like state Mrs. Kovac had described. The door remained locked. No one had tried to enter. Isabel stood on shaking legs and examined herself in the small mirror above the washbasin. Pale, dark circles under her eyes, but alive. The bandage on her left arm had bled through slightly, and the bite mark on her right wrist showed as 2 small punctures surrounded by faint bruising. She touched them gently, remembering the strange intimacy of feeding him. The warmth, the connection. A soft knock made her jump. Miss Thorne? Mrs. Kovac's voice strained and tired. Lord Marcellus sent word you were here. I've brought food. Isabel unlocked the door carefully, peering through the gap before opening it fully. Mrs. Kovac stood in the corridor holding a tray, her expression drawn. Behind her, the hallway showed signs of violence, gouges in the wallpaper, a broken sconce, dark stains on the carpet that could only be blood. Come in, Isabel said quietly. Mrs. Kovac entered, setting the tray on the desk. Bread, cheese, boiled eggs, tea, and a glass of dark liquid that smelled metallic. Liver broth, she explained, seeing Isabel's expression. For the blood loss. Drink it all, you'll need your strength. Isabel sat and obeyed, forcing down the unpleasant broth before moving to the more palatable food. What happened last night? Mrs. Kovac sank into the room's only chair, suddenly looking every one of her years. War happened. House Morgrave had 6 vampires hidden on the grounds before you reinforced the wards, waiting for their moment. When the main attack started outside, they struck from within. She rubbed her face. We lost 3 of our own. 5 of theirs are dead. The rest retreated before dawn. 3 dead. Isabel's stomach turned. I'm sorry. War costs. Mrs. Kovac's voice was flat. Always has. At least we held the east wing. If they'd reached the sleeping quarters, it would have been a massacre. She looked at Isabel with something like respect. Lord Marcellus said you fed him. Willingly. That took courage. It took desperation. Isabel finished the eggs, her appetite returning with the food. He was starving. Someone had to help. Not someone. You. Mrs. Kovac stood, collecting the empty dishes. There are 12 vampires in this house who could have offered blood. None did, too afraid of the bond it creates, or too proud to show vulnerability. But you, marked mortal, with everything to lose, you gave freely. She paused at the door. That won't be forgotten, child. By Lord Marcellus or anyone else. After Mrs. Kovac left, Isabel explored the room more thoroughly. The desk held papers, correspondence in multiple languages, strategic maps, financial ledgers tracking the house's holdings. All of it carefully organized, annotated in Lord Marcellus's precise hand. The wardrobe contained clothes from different eras of Victorian coat, 1922 evening wear, modern suits. Like he couldn't quite let go of any version of himself he'd been, and everywhere, small traces of Elena. A pressed flower in a book, a ribbon bookmark, a sketched portrait of a young woman laughing unsigned, but clearly drawn with love. He'd kept this room as a shrine, Isabel realized. Not to his sister exactly, but to the promise he'd made her. To remain human in the ways that mattered, even while being monster. The blood bond pulsed gently at the edge of her awareness. Lord Marcellus, still deep in day sleep, unreachable. But knowing he was there, knowing she could sense him, made the manor feel less empty. Isabel spent the day helping Mrs. Kovic and the other human servants clean up the damage. It gave her something to do, kept her mind off the drying bloodstains and shattered furniture. They worked in near silence, the weight of the previous night's violence hanging over everything. By late afternoon, exhaustion caught up with her. Isabel returned to Lord Marcellus's room, her room now, she supposed, at least temporarily, and collapsed onto the bed. Sleep claimed her within minutes. She dreamed of blood and silver eyes and a voice calling her name in darkness. When she woke, the room was full dark, and Lord Marcellus sat in the chair Mrs. Kovic had occupied that morning, watching her. He'd changed clothes, still dark, but casual now, the formal coat replaced by a simple shirt. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before, the immortal veneer cracked enough to show the man underneath. You were restless, he said quietly. Dreaming. I could feel it through the bond. Isabel sat up, pushing hair from her face. How long have you been sitting there? Not long. I woke at sunset, dealt with the aftermath, checked on the wounded. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Then I came here. Needed to see that you were all right. I'm fine. Mrs. Kovic took good care of me. She said you helped clean today. You didn't have to do that. I needed to feel useful. Isabel studied him in the candlelight. Through the bond, she could feel his exhaustion, his grief for the lost vampires, his simmering rage at House Morgrave. 3 of your people died last night. Yes. Pain flickered across his face. Thomas, Eliza, and young Marcus only turned 50 years ago. They died defending the East Wing, buying time for the others to fortify positions. He rubbed his eyes. I sent letters to their families tonight. Explained that they died with honor. It doesn't help much, but it's all I can offer. I'm sorry. So am I. He looked at her with those ancient, tired eyes. This is my fault. I should have anticipated Morgrave hiding vampires inside the wards before you reinforced them. Should have swept the grounds more carefully. You can't predict everything. I'm supposed to. Bitterness edged his voice. I'm lord of this house. Their safety is my responsibility. And I failed them. Isabel rose and crossed to him, kneeling so they were eye level. You're not a god, Marcellus. You're just. She stopped, realizing what she'd been about to say. What? A monster? He smiled without humor. That's accurate. I was going to say you're just doing your best. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and took his hand. His fingers were cool, steady. Mrs. Kovic told me you held the East Wing, saved dozens of vampires who would have been slaughtered in day sleep. You can't save everyone, but you saved who you could. He stared at their joined hands like he'd forgotten what human touch felt like. The bond is stronger than I expected, he said quietly. I can feel your conviction, your strange faith in me. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. It's been a very long time since anyone had faith in me. Then they're fools. Lord Marcellus laughed, short and surprised and almost genuine. You barely know me, Isabel. For all you know, I'm exactly the monster House Morgrave claims. Are you? Sometimes, honesty, raw and unguarded. When I have to be. When protecting my house requires it. I've killed, lied, manipulated. I've done things Elena would have hated me for. But you haven't broken her promise. He went still. No, I haven't, even when it would have been easier. Outside, something held distant but clear. They were coming back. Chapter 8. Human ingenuity. Howl was answered by 3 more. Forming a circle around the manor's perimeter, Lord Marcellus was on his feet instantly, his hands still gripping Isabel's. They're testing the wards again, seeing if last night weakened our defenses enough to breach. Did it? Isabel stood with him, her heart already racing. I don't know. Victor is reinforcing the anchor points, but without fresh blood. He stopped, looking at their joined hands. No, absolutely not. You've given enough. That's not what I was going to suggest. Isabel moved to the window, studying the grounds below. Shadows moved between the trees too many to count, all circling with predatory patience. How do the wards actually work? You said they're rooted in physical anchor points. Yes. 8 stones placed at cardinal and ordinal directions around the property. They create a barrier that recognizes house-driven members and repels everyone else. He joined her at the window. Why? Because barriers can be disrupted from the outside if you know where the anchor points are. Isabel's mind raced, pulling from half-remembered conversations with her engineer, ex-fiancé. They're testing the perimeter. Yes, but they're also mapping. Looking for the weak spots, the places where the stones might be damaged or misaligned. Lord Marcellus stared at her. How do you know this? My ex-fiancé worked in security systems. Spent months boring me with details about perimeter defenses and sensor networks. She laughed bitterly. Never thought that particular torture would come in handy. Can they find the anchor points just by circling? If they're smart, yes. They're looking for anomalies, places where the ward energy is stronger or weaker, spots where the barrier flickers. Isabel turned from the window. But that also means we can use it against them. If we know they're mapping our defenses, we can feed them false information. Understanding dawned in Lord Marcellus's expression. You want to create decoy anchor points. Exactly. Make them think the weak spots are somewhere they're not. Then when they attack what they believe is our vulnerability, we're waiting for them with overwhelming force. He was already moving toward the door. Come with me. Victor needs to hear this. They found Victor in the war room, bent over the maps with Serafini, the amber-eyed warrior from last night. Both looked up as Lord Marcellus and Isabel entered. They're back, Serafini said grimly. 12, maybe 15 vampires, all older than the ones we killed last night. House Morgrave is sending their experienced fighters. Victor marked positions on the map. They're not playing anymore. Good. Lord Marcellus gestured Isabel forward. Tell them your idea. Isabel explained her theory, feeling increasingly self-conscious under the vampire's intense scrutiny. When she finished, silence filled the room. It could work, Victor said slowly. If we create false energy signatures at 3 or 4 locations, spread their forces, they'll divide their strength attacking multiple points simultaneously, Serafini finished. And we can concentrate our defenders at the real anchor points. How do we create false signatures? Lord Marcellus asked. Victor smiled, sharp and dangerous. Blood magic. We take vampire blood volunteers from our own house and use it to mimic the ward energy at strategic locations. It won't hold up to close inspection, but from a distance, in darkness, with rain interfering with their senses, he shrugged. They'll see what they expect to see. How long to set up? Lord Marcellus was already moving into command mode, his exhaustion burned away by purpose. 2 hours. Maybe less if everyone cooperates. Victor looked at Isabel with newfound respect. This is clever, Miss Thorne. Very clever. Where should we place the decoys? Isabel studied the map, marking 3 locations with her finger. Here the garden wall they damaged yesterday. They already think it's weak. Here the north gate where they tested last night. And here she pointed to the southeast corner. This is furthest from the manor itself. If they commit forces there, they're out of position to support the other groups. Brilliant. Serafini was grinning now, all teeth. We let them think they've found our weakness, then crush them when they overextend. The next 2 hours were controlled chaos. Victor and 2 other vampires prepared the decoy wards, while Lord Marcellus positioned defenders at the real anchor points. Serafini organized patrols, weapons were distributed, and everyone moved with military precision. Isabel stayed in the war room, tracking movements on the map as reports came in. Mrs. Kovac appeared with tea and sandwiches, forcing her to eat despite her churning stomach. You did good, child, the old woman said quietly. Gave them a fighting chance. I hope so. Through the blood bond, Isabel felt Lord Marcellus moving through the manor, checking defenses, encouraging his people, radiating confidence, even when she could sense the worry underneath. He was a good leader, she realized. The kind who inspired loyalty not through fear, but through genuine care for those under his protection. At midnight, the attacks began. The howling stopped suddenly, replaced by eerie silence. Then impacts against the wards at all 3 decoy locations simultaneously. Isabel felt rather than heard them, a vibration in the air that made her teeth ache. They're taking the bait. Victor's voice came through a communication device Serafini had left with her. Southeast force is 10 strong. Garden wall has 8. North gate static. North gate is the main assault. 20 vampires, maybe more. Isabel's heart sank. That's more than we expected. Doesn't matter. Lord Marcellus's voice, steady and cold. Let them exhaust themselves against false barriers. When they realize the deception and regroup, we'll be ready. The assault lasted 15 minutes. Isabel tracked it through reports and the blood bond, feeling Lord Marcellus's tension as he waited for the right moment. The enemy vampires threw themselves against the decoy wards with increasing desperation, draining their strength against barriers that didn't protect anything. Then Victor's voice crackled through again. They've figured it out. Forces are pulling back, regrouping at, he swore in a language Isabel didn't know. They're regrouping at the real north anchor point. They're going to hit it with everything. All defenders to north position, Lord Marcellus commanded. Now, through the blood bond, Isabel felt him moving supernatural speed carrying him toward the battle. She felt his focus narrow, his humanity recede, the predator taking full control. The clash of combat was soundless from her position in the war room, but she felt every moment of it through their connection. Lord Marcellus fighting with 3-century-old skill, his people rallying around him, the enemy falling back under coordinated assault. Then pain, sharp and sudden, blooming through the bond like fire. Lord Marcellus had been hurt. Isabel was moving before conscious thought caught up, racing through corridors toward the north side of the manor. She had no weapons, no plan, no idea what she could possibly do against vampires, but the bond pulled her forward like a compass pointing true north, and she couldn't ignore it. Chapter 9. The price of protection. Isabel burst through the manor's north entrance into chaos. Bodies both moving and still littered the grounds near the ward stone. Rain turned everything to mud and blood, making it impossible to distinguish friend from enemy in the darkness. Vampires moved too fast for her human eyes to track. Their combat a blur of inhuman speed and violence. Then she saw him. Lord Marcellus was on his knees 20 feet from the ward stone. One hand pressed to his side where blood black in the moonlight seeped between his fingers. A female vampire stood over him, pale and beautiful and terrible, her smile victorious as she raised a wooden stake. Isabel didn't think. She ran. The vampire saw her coming, of course she did, but seemed amused rather than threatened by Immortal charging into battle. That amusement cost her the crucial second Isabel needed to slam into her with all her weight, disrupting the killing blow. They went down together in the mud. The vampire recovered first, tossing Isabel aside like she weighed nothing. Pain exploded through Isabel's shoulder as she hit the ground, but she scrambled up, putting herself between Lord Marcellus and his attacker. Brave, the vampire purred, circling. Stupid, but brave. You're the marked one, aren't you? The mortal he's been protecting. Her eyes glowed crimson in the darkness. House Morgrave will reward me well for bringing you in. You'll have to go through me first. Isabel's voice shook, but she held her ground. The vampire laughed. Gladly. She lunged and Victor materialized from nowhere, catching her mid-strike. They crashed into the ward stone with enough force to crack it, then tumbled away, their fight moving too fast for Isabel to follow. She dropped to her knees beside Lord Marcellus. Up close, the wound looked worse, a jagged tear across his ribs, the kind of damage that would kill a human instantly. His face had gone gray, his breathing shallow. Isabel. His voice was barely audible over the rain and combat. You can't be, shut up. She pressed her hands to the wound, trying to stanch the bleeding. Her fingers came away slick and dark. How do I help you? What do you need? Blood, fresh blood. But you've already, he coughed, and more blood stained his lips. Too weak. Can't ask again. Through the bond, Isabel felt his systems shutting down, his supernatural healing failing without fuel. He was dying. Not the true death vampires feared, sunlight or beheading or heart stake, but dying nonetheless, his body consuming itself trying to repair damage it couldn't sustain. You're not asking. I'm offering. Isabel shifted, cradling his head in her lap. How much do you need? Too much. Would hurt you, how much? His eyes found hers, silver dimming to gray. Until I can heal. Could be minutes. Could be another cough. Could drain you dry if I lose control. Around them, the battle raged. Vampires screamed and died. The ward stone pulsed with failing energy. And Isabel made her choice. She pulled the bandage from her left arm, the wound from the ward ritual still healing, and pressed it to Lord Marcellus's mouth. Then don't lose control. His fangs found the wound instantly, reopening it with surgical precision. The pull was stronger this time, more desperate, and Isabel gasped at the intensity. It felt like being unmade and remade simultaneously. Her blood pouring into him, while his need poured back through the bond. She felt his strength returning, his healing accelerating, his presence in her mind growing solid and fierce. But she also felt her own vitality draining, her vision blurring, her heartbeat slowing to something dangerous. "Marcellus," she whispered. "Enough. It's enough." He didn't respond, lost in feeding, his survival instinct overriding everything else. Isabel tried to pull away, but his grip had become iron. Panic fluttered in her chest. She'd miscalculated, given him too much trust, too much blood. He was going to kill her without meaning to, and she had no one to blame but herself. "Marcellus." She put everything she had into his name, into the bond between them. "Stop, please." He froze. For a terrible moment, nothing happened, his fangs still embedded in her arm, her blood still flowing. Then, with visible effort, he pulled back, released her, rolled away from her like she'd burned him. They lay in the mud, both gasping, him from restraint, her from blood loss. Rain fell on their faces, washing away some of the carnage. "I'm sorry." His voice was wrecked. You told me to stop and I almost didn't, but you did." Isabel sat up slowly, the world tilting. "You stopped." Around them, the battle had ended. Moorgrave vampires lay dead, or retreating into the night. House-driven members were regrouping, tending to their wounded. Victor appeared above them, his clothes torn and bloodied, his expression grim. "The ward is damaged, but holding. We have casualties, but we held the line." He looked between Isabel and Lord Marcellus, understanding dawning. "She fed you again. She saved my life." Lord Marcellus stood steady now, the wound in his side already closing. He reached down to help Isabel up, his touch careful. Again, Serafini joined them, supporting a vampire who'd lost an arm in the fighting. "Moorgrave is retreating, but they'll be back. They know we're vulnerable now. They saw our lord nearly fall." Her amber eyes found Isabel, and they saw the mortal protect him. "That changes everything." "How?" Isabel asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Because now they know you matter to him." Serafini's expression was almost pitying. "Before, you were just a marked mortal, valuable but not essential. Now, you're leverage. They'll come for you specifically, use you against him." She looked at Lord Marcellus. "You need to send her away. Somewhere safe, somewhere Moorgrave can't find her." No, the word came from both Isabel and Lord Marcellus simultaneously. They looked at each other, surprise flickering through the bond. "I won't be sent away like a liability," Isabel said firmly, despite how badly she wanted to sit down. "I chose to stay. I choose to keep staying." "She stays." Lord Marcellus's voice held command that brooked no argument. "Under my direct protection. If Moorgrave wants her, they'll have to go through me first." "They'll try," Victor said quietly. "You know they will. And next time, they might succeed." Lord Marcellus looked at Isabel, really looked at her, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. "Then we'll face them together. All of us." His hand found hers, squeezing gently. No more fighting alone. Through the bond, Isabel felt his resolve, his fear for her, and underneath it all something warmer, something that might have been the beginning of love. If they survived long enough for it to grow, together, she agreed softly. In the distance, House Moorgrave held their retreat, but everyone knew they'd be back. Chapter 10. Partnership, not possession. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet. House Moorgrave didn't attack again, but their presence circled the manor like wolves waiting for weakness. Isabel watched from the windows during daylight hours, seeing shadows that moved wrong, hearing howls that came too close. At night, Lord Marcellus reinforced defenses and prepared his people for the inevitable final assault, and between the planning and the waiting, something shifted between them. The blood bond had deepened with each feeding, until Isabel could sense not just Lord Marcellus's presence, but his emotions, the weight of leadership, the fear for his people, the guilt over putting her in danger. And underneath it all, growing stronger each day, something he tried desperately to hide from her, longing, deep and aching, and 3 centuries in the making. Isabel felt it through the bond and couldn't pretend ignorance. But she also couldn't address it, not while war hung over them, not while every night might be their last. On the 4th evening, Lord Marcellus found her in the library, surrounded by books on vampire law and house politics. She'd been trying to understand the war's deeper causes, the ancient grudges and broken treaties that had led to this moment, You should be resting, he said, settling into the chair across from her. He looked better than he had since she'd arrived. The regular feeding had restored color to his face, strength to his movements. You gave too much blood 3 days ago. You're still recovering. I'm fine. Isabel closed the book. She'd been reading a treatise on the Treaty of 1843 that House Morgrave had allegedly broken. Tell me the truth. Why does Morgrave want this territory so badly? There has to be more to it than just the murders. Lord Marcellus was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those ancient eyes. Then he sighed. There is, but it's a truth I haven't shared with anyone except Victor. Tell me, this territory sits on a convergence point, a place where multiple ley lines meet. It makes the land powerful, magically charged. Any vampire house that controls it gains significant advantages in blood magic, ward creation, even in the strength of their turned vampires. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Elena discovered it actually, used it to break her own vampire bond, chose mortality over immortality. That's why I've held this territory for 100 years, to keep it from houses who would abuse that power. Understanding dawned. And House Morgrave wants it to create more vampires. Stronger vampires. Exactly. They've been turning mortals recklessly for decades, building an army. If they gain access to the convergence point, they could create something truly dangerous. Vampires who don't need to feed as often, who are harder to kill, who could walk in daylight for short periods. His expression darkened. It would destabilize the entire vampire world. The council would lose control. War would spread beyond the houses to involve mortals. So you're not just protecting your territory, you're protecting everyone. For what it's worth, yes. He smiled without humor. Though I suspect most wouldn't see it that way. They'd just see two ancient houses fighting over land and power. Isabel set the book aside and moved to kneel before him, mirroring that moment in his room days ago. What happens if you lose? If Morgrave takes the manor? Then I invoke the scorched earth clause. His voice was flat. I destroy the convergence point, completely collapse the ley lines, render the land magically dead for centuries. No one gets the power. He met her eyes. Including my own house. We'd lose everything we've built here. Would that kill you? No, but it would scatter my people, leave us vulnerable, essentially end House Dreven as a political force. His hand came up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with devastating gentleness. That's why I need you to leave before it comes to that, Isabel. If I have to destroy the convergence, the magical backlash will be catastrophic. Anyone still on the grounds will die. Then we make sure it doesn't come to that. We? He smiled, sad and fond. You keep saying we. Like you're part of this house now, aren't I? Isabel covered his hand with hers, holding it against her cheek. I've bled for your wards, fed your lord, fought in your battles. What else do I need to do to belong here? Through the bond, she felt his emotions spike, hope and fear and desperate desire all tangled together. Isabel. Her name was a prayer, a warning. You don't know what you're offering. Then tell me. Explain it clearly, and let me choose. Lord Marcellus pulled his hand away, standing and pacing to the window. Rain had started again, sheeting against the glass. To truly belong to House Dreven, to be under permanent protection rather than temporary sanctuary, you would need to take a blood oath. Bind yourself to the house and its lord through ritual. He didn't turn around. It's not quite marriage, not quite servitude, but something in between. Your life would be tied to mine. If I died, you'd be free. But until then, you'd be mine in the eyes of vampire law. And in your eyes? He did turn then, and the hunger in his expression had nothing to do with blood. In my eyes, you'd be everything I shouldn't want and can't stop wanting anyway. Partner, equal, the first person in 300 years I've wanted to protect, not out of duty, but out of. He stopped, jaw clenched. Out of what? Isabel stood, crossing to him. Say it, love. The word came out rough, like it hurt. I'm falling in love with you, Isabel Thorne. Have been since you walked into that ballroom and chose to trust me despite every reason not to. And it terrifies me because everyone I love dies or leaves, and I won't watch you do either. Isabel's heart was racing, the bond between them singing with his admission. What if I don't want to leave? What if I want to take the oath, bind myself to you and this house? Then I'd ask if you understand what you're giving up. He cupped her face in both hands, his touch cool and careful. Mortality eventually. Your old life? Completely. The freedom to walk away when vampire politics become too much. Because the oath is permanent, Isabel. Once taken, it can only be broken by death, or by mutual release, she countered, pulling from the book she'd been reading. The Treaty of 1843 allows for consensual dissolution of blood oaths if both parties agree. He blinked. You've been studying vampire law. I've been trying to understand my options. She placed her hands over his. Here's what I understand. You're offering me a choice between safety elsewhere or danger with you. Between running from this life or running toward it. Between being protected like property or being partnered like an equal. I want the partnership, Lord Marcellus said quietly. I want you choosing to stay because you want to, not because you have nowhere else to go. But Isabel, the danger is real. House Morgrave will come for us, soon, and I might not be able to protect you. Then we protect each other. She smiled, feeling certainty settle in her chest. That's what partners do. Through the bond, his emotions crashed over her relief and joy and bone-deep fear. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Lord Marcellus pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. Then we do the ritual tonight. Bind you to House Dreven properly. And tomorrow he pulled back, his expression hardening into something determined. Tomorrow I end this war, one way or another. How? His smile was all predator. I challenge House Morgrave's lord to single combat. Winner takes the territory, loser takes the true death. It's old law, but it still holds. He brushed his thumb across her cheekbone. No more of my people dying for land. No more putting you in danger. Just me and Morgrave's lord, settling this the way our kind did for millennia. That's insane, probably. He kissed her forehead gently. But it's the only way I see this ending without massive casualties. And if I fall you won't. But if I do, he continued firmly, Victor will help you leave. Get you somewhere safe. Somewhere House Morgrave can't find you. Promise me you'll let him. Isabel wanted to argue, to insist she'd fight beside him. But she saw the fear in his eyes, the desperate need to know she'd survive even if he didn't. I promise, she whispered. But you're going to win. I know you will. How can you be so certain? Because you have something he doesn't, she smiled, taking his hand and placing it over her heart. Someone worth coming back to, through the blood bond, through the touch, through 3 centuries of loneliness finally broken. Lord Marcellus felt the truth of her words. And for the first time since the war began, he let himself hope. Outside House Morgrave howled. Inside, 2 people who shouldn't have found each other prepared to face the darkness together. And in the convergence point beneath the manor, ancient magic stirred, recognizing the bond forming above it. The partnership being forged in blood and trust and desperate, defiant hope. The war would end tomorrow, but tonight, they had each other. And somehow, that was enough.